Do you know the warm progress under the stars? Do you know we exist? Have you forgotten the keys to the kingdom? Have you been born yet, and are you alive? Let's reinvent the gods, all the myths of the ages. Celebrate symbols from deep elder forests. Have you forgotten the lessons of the ancient war? We have assembled inside this ancient and insane theater to propagate our lust for life and flee the swarming wisdom of the streets.
Mics are coming on.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor.
Hi folks, welcome back to a new edition of Radical Communion. My name is Peter Tocci, and I'm sitting here with the redoubtable Mr. Jocko Bobblehead McMahon. And there he is. And I have to say that we're, again, unfortunately, due to logistics, I have to press the series on Beyond Treason into 5 episodes that I originally had planned for 6. So we're pressed for time today, but I want to express my appreciation for my associate here, and hopefully we're going to have he's very good at bobbling the head. And I want to mention that the treason clip that you just saw right after our show intro was part of this Beyond Treason, which is an intense documentary produced by the Power Hour, which is an internet radio and media company. And this is about U.S. government and military mistreatment and abuse of our soldiers, particularly battlefield and medical exposures that they're sometimes not made aware of. And then to top it off, they end up destitute and uncared for. I want to express my gratitude to the Power Hour and especially William Lewis, the director, for permission to use this copyrighted material on our show here. So the next clip that we're going to see is not from Beyond Treason, but it's a part of a clip from our 9/11 series. You probably remember this, where we used excerpts from Confronting the Evidence, which is the video produced by Jimmy Walter. And this is all on 9/11. This particular clip deals with pretext for war, staged events or phony stories, in other words, to amp up public opinion and public sentiment. And this is emphasis on Gulf War I, which a lot of our Beyond Treason is dealing with. So go ahead, Carl, and run clip number 2.
Then comes this eyewitness testimony before a congressional committee from a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl. The claim is she cannot be identified for fear of reprisals.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
The U.S. public is outraged. The result? Support for land war zooms. It's a turning point. Desert Storm is launched. 135,000 Iraqis are killed. An estimated 1 million Iraqis, many of them children and old people, then die as a result of 10 years of sanctions. One small problem. There never were any incubator baby deaths, not one. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's investigative flagship program, The Fifth Estate, reveals the girl to be the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, given her lines and coached in acting by the giant American PR firm Hill & Knowlton. It's one phase in a $10 million joint U.S.-Kuwaiti campaign of deception. This man is lying.
I myself buried 40 newborn babies that had been taken from their incubators.
This man is lying.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
There were a lot of people who participated in a conspiracy. Yes, an out-and-out conspiracy of fake organizations, false documents, fraud, and disinformation. So, if a new man named Bush is in the White House and helps engineer a brazen deception in order to achieve global geopolitical goals, as well as domestic and personal ones, it wouldn't be a first, would it?
Again, what I did not tell you before was that in the course of my research, I discovered that Colin Powell was a habitual liar. In the run-up to Gulf War I, Colin Powell testified that he had satellite photos of 2,500 Iraqi tanks on the Saudi border ready to invade. A St. Petersburg Times reporter went to the Russians and bought a satellite photo of the area. Not one single tank. Years later, when questioned by reporters, Powell admitted there were no tanks, that in effect he had lied. And for those of you who do not remember, Colin Powell was the officer who covered up the My Lai massacre.
Okay, that's the point is, you know, it would be one thing if, you know, the wars were legitimate, you know, but what they're doing to the soldiers might be, you know, a little more forgivable. But these are planned, they're contrived by elite operatives and who lie us into them, you know. And then they cover it all up with the controlled media and stuff about national security, you know. And I want to mention that the war on terror is no different. It's a protection racket. It's a contrived situation, and we might even throw in here the war on drugs as well. We touched on in the show we talked about the BCCI scandal, where I read about the 4 books, and we learned about the oil money kickback between Saddam and George Herbert Walker Bush, all leading up to Gulf War I. And so what I'm saying is, you know, maybe we should be standing up to these insane people and not sacrificing our sons and daughters so without enough investigation. And this is where we need our state and local politicians to get involved, and not to mention our local newspaper. Now, I've had to watch this series many times in preparing for the show, and almost every time it brings me to tears. So if I seemed a little ruffled under the feathers at any time, that's why. And but fair warning right now, this series is going to get intense. So if you're one of those people that gets all angry when our pet notions about what our government's doing in the world are challenged, turn off the channel right now. Go watch Fox News, CNN, do what you want. But if you're prepared to become a little better informed, stay tuned. Okay, so the next clip we're going to see is back to Beyond Treason, and we'll finish out the intro, and in there the announcer says that the military still denies that there's any such thing as a Gulf War syndrome, and I verified that on the Veterans Administration website. They deny it. And then we're going to hear from Lieutenant Doug Rocky, who is an Army Nuclear Medical Sciences officer, and he was assigned by the military to assess the contamination in the Gulf and to clean up after it. So go ahead, Carl, and run clip number 3.
It is more than a trial by fire. It is a rite of passage, a challenge to join the elite. And if you succeed, if you can master your fear, outsmart your enemy, and never yield even to yourself, you will be changed forever.
Yes, you may very well be changed forever, as thousands of our military have learned. This documentary is dedicated to those who served in the U.S. military for the right reasons, who wonder why they are not and never will be the same, why they are sick, and why military leaders, veterans leaders, and the three branches of our government do not assist them in getting medical care and compensation. The majority of our veterans only want to know what is wrong with them, why they became ill, and how they can be made well again. We will focus on the experiments conducted, the documents that support this experimentation, and what must be done to advance the cause of basic human rights for all active duty, guard, reserve, and veterans. For those of you who are not familiar with military experimentation, you are about to get a lesson in history. For to experiment without consent is truly beyond treason.
Bomb away.
Atomic veterans include members of the United States Armed Forces who were exposed to ionizing radiation from atomic and nuclear weapons testing during the period beginning with the Trinity blast of July 16, 1945 at Alamogordo, New Mexico, the U.S. cleanup of Nagasaki, Hiroshima, the 235 atmospheric and nuclear weapons test in the Pacific, and Nevada test sites ending with the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963. The National Association of Atomic Veterans recognizes that civilians, as well as military personnel, were exposed to harmful nuclear material radiation, and that many of these personnel have since died as a result of radiation-induced illnesses. Over 382,000 servicemen, as well as civilian personnel, took part in a variety of tests during the Cold War period, when the Atomic Energy Commission, working in conjunction with the Department of Defense, had troops participate in and witness the detonation at various Pacific and Nevada test areas. Troops, ships, and various types of equipment were placed from several hundred yards to several miles from the center of each detonation. On many occasions, military personnel performed maneuvers in and around ground zeros without any protective clothing or respiratory devices. Since the end of these tests in 1963, there has been no government-sponsored medical surveillance of test participants, nor any effort to locate these individuals to warn them of potential health threats. Project MKUltra was the code name for the CIA mind control research program lasting from the 1950s to the 1970s. In 1964, the project was renamed MK Search. Because most of the MKUltra records were deliberately destroyed in 1972 by order of then-director Richard Helms, it is impossible to have a complete understanding of the more than 160 individually funded research projects sponsored by MKUltra and the related CIA programs. Experiments included radiation, LSD. Experiments included dosing CIA employees, military personnel, other government agents, prostitutes, mental patients, and members of the general public with LSD to study their reactions, usually without the subject's knowledge, as part of an extensive program to influence and control human behavior through the use of psychoactive drugs such as LSD, mescaline, and other chemical, biological, and psychological means. The report states that no official records were kept regarding the deaths or illnesses of experimentees. A U.S. Army project that ended over 25 years ago is now the subject of much scrutiny. Project Whitecoat was the Army's code name for a series of germ warfare studies conducted on about 2,300 Seventh-day Adventist servicemen from 1954 to 1973. Now the Army is investigating the long-term effects that the project may have had on its participants. They center on the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the role that it played in the U.S. Army's development of chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction. Under strict secrecy, the U.S. Army established Camp Detrick outside of Frederick, Maryland during World War II for the sole purpose of developing germ weapons. In 1952, the Army Medical Corps stationed a medical unit in Fort Detrick, and in 1954, this unit began using Seventh-day Adventist soldiers in its research, presumably in the defensive aspects of germ warfare. Fort Detrick was home to what became known as Project Whitecoat, the code name for the group of Seventh-day Adventist soldiers who were used as human guinea pigs in biowarfare research. Agent Orange was the code name for an herbicide developed for the military primarily for use in tropical climates. The purpose of the product was to deny an enemy cover and concealment in dense terrain by defoliating trees and shrubbery where the enemy could hide. Agent Orange was a 50-50 mix of two chemicals known conventionally as 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. The combined product was mixed with kerosene or diesel fuel and dispersed by aircraft, vehicle, and hand spraying. An estimated 19 million gallons of Agent Orange was used in South Vietnam during the war, potentially affecting 2.5 million Vietnam veterans. BZ is the Army's designation of the psychedelic chemical known in military circles as Agent Buzz, or by the Army's chemical code designation of EA2277. BZ was aerosolized, sprayed from aircraft, and utilized in conventional bombs. The effect of BZ was that it was psychotropic in nature. Over 362 human subjects were experimented upon at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah in 1964 under the code name of Project Dork. You may have seen the movie Jacob's Ladder, which depicts effects from the mist sprayed over our military by our Department of Defense. To this date, the Department of Defense continues to deny and stonewall the existence of a Gulf War illness. The Gulf War illness is a cumulative effect of exposure to depleted uranium, chemicals, biologicals, vaccines, petrochemical agents, and parasite diseases such as leishmaniasis. Few people are aware that the Gulf War was yet another example of the Department of Defense's intentional exposure of its own troops to its own deadly weapons. From 1984 through 1989, the U.S. government, with full knowledge of the CDC and the Department of Commerce, sold and transferred to Iraq $4 billion worth of deadly chemical agents, deadly biological agents such as anthrax, Clostridium botulinum, and West Nile fever virus. As a result of the First Gulf War, hundreds of thousands of our military are now sick, and many have died. The official figure of those who served in Operation Desert Shield and Storm is 697,000. The Department of Defense has now declared nearly 250,000 of those troops as permanently disabled. The official position of the Department of Defense is that there are no classified or unclassified documents that exist to prove that chemicals and biologicals were used in the First Gulf War. But in only a 100-hour war, when less than 150 troops died, how do we explain the morbidity and mortality rate of nearly 450,000 of our servicemen and women?
At the time that the Gulf War started, I was the nuclear medical sciences officer, intelligence and covering everything, special operations officer, mobilization officer, training officer for 330th Medical Brigade. That's the largest medical brigade in the U.S. Army. It's an Army Reserve Medical Command under a one-star general.
Dr. Doug Rocky is a U.S. Army health physicist and nuclear medical sciences officer. Dr. Rocky has expertise in nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare operations, microwave radiation, emergency response, decontamination, and battlefield cleanup.
We were the super garbage men. We had to clean up the messes. We had to identify the messes. We had to collect all the garbage. We had to provide the on-site medical care. It's a lot. All the Iraqi equipment, a lot of U.S. equipment, contains radiological components. When that equipment was blowing up, the radiological materials were released into the environment, exposing and contaminating. And then to top it all off, we used uranium munitions, known as depleted uranium. They've been used back in 1973 by the Israelis against the Egyptians, but during Gulf War I, Desert Shield and Desert Storm, we took it to a totally new level. The use of radioactive materials on the battlefield. Deliberately taken tons and tons, actually over 350 tons of solid radioactive materials, and dispersed it across Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. Taking our radioactive waste and throw it in somebody else's backyard. I am considered a disabled veteran. I've got a 40% disability from the United States Department of Veteran Affairs for combat injuries caused by depleted uranium and other exposures.
Lieutenant Colonel John Marks is an A-10 pilot attached to the 303rd Fighter Squadron stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri.
The reason it used depleted uranium is it's a very dense, heavy metal, and it's able to penetrate the most armor of any type of material used. It is a very minor amount of radioactivity, but it's not anything that, as long as it's in its bullet form, it can be stored, and it's not any type of hazardous material. Once it hits a vehicle and vaporizes, then it becomes more of a hazardous material that you have to have special handling of that type of thing. But in its normal bullet form, it's not hazardous because of the depleted uranium. It is highly effective against armor.
We got direct memorandum from the Department of the Army and other Department of Defense officials just simply telling us that not only were uranium munitions a health threat, they were a serious health threat, the contamination. We got direct warnings, famed Los Alamos memorandum, that to make sure and write a report so that uranium munitions can always be used because there's direct concern about the health and environmental effects. We had the warnings. We also had the responsibility to put together all the decontamination guidelines and also what's called the Combat Lifesaver Program. So myself and my team wrote that, which has now been adopted by the Army and is used every day by the Army.
Battlefields and fighting are by nature hazardous to your health. Some hazards are easy to identify and well understood. Soldiers recognize the serious hazards presented by incoming artillery shells and bullets and take appropriate actions. However, some lesser hazards from new technological applications are not so well known and recognized. One of these newer applications is the use of depleted uranium in munitions and equipment armor.
This is an aluminum model of one DU tank round. This round would be fired by an Abrams tank. If it was actually uranium rather than aluminum, it would be over 10 pounds of solid uranium. What happens, it moves extremely high velocity. The minute it leaves the bore of the gun, it catches fire. So this rod is a burning rod of uranium. It impacts tremendous forces, unbelievable forces, over this very small diameter. And it's like a blowtorch with tremendous forces that punches right through. Now as this breaks through and goes into anything, can be steel, concrete, sandbag bunkers, wood, or anything, uranium itself is soft. So you have parts of the fragments of uranium breaks off as it enters and goes through. The uranium rod emits alpha, beta, and gamma radiation and X-ray radiation. The alpha particle is a 4.15 MeV particle. That's 4.15 million electron volts. Now the intercellular voltage, the voltage that your cell operates biologically, is 10 electron volts. So when that cell is bombarded by an alpha particle at 4.5 million electron volts, it doesn't have a good day. We have all kinds of other problems. We have the beta particle and the gamma rays, the X-rays. Now we've actually measured the ionizing radiation emissions from a DU rod within, say, 4 to 6 inches at over 300 millirems per hour. Now that radiation is continuous. So you get a fragment of DU into your body that's emitting at over 300 millirems per hour. Or if you're holding the rod in your hand, it's over 300 millirems per hour. And if you got the fragment, then you got the alpha particle in there, which is extremely high particle, 4.15 MeV. And we're looking at what we measured over 10,000 counts per minute, 10,000 disintegrations per minute, 10,000 alpha particles per minute. In fact, in May of 2002, the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs reported that over 160,000 troops that participated in Gulf War I, the period August of 1990 through the fall of 1991, basically October and November 1991, have been classified as disabled from anywhere from 10 to 100%. Now, my own disability didn't come about until after May of 2002. The count right now is somewhere close to 200,000. When we look at all the troops that have gone into the Persian Gulf region between August of 1990 and May of 2002, when the last formal report was written, the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs formally acknowledges over 221,000 individuals are labeled as permanently disabled, and over 10,000 are deceased that had service connection disabilities. There's a big difference. There's a 60,000 increase in individuals that are disabled amongst those that served after the fall of 1991. That disability is only due to residual exposures and immunizations that were continued to be given, because there was no active combat. There was no active maneuvering. So what's happened? Well, what happened prior to Gulf War I is pre-deployment health physical assessments were not given. And at the completion of Gulf War I, post-deployment health physical assessments were not given, even though we specifically requested it. In my own case, when I came back to get released after completing special projects, I said I was exposed to these. We need to do these tests. And they refused to do them.
Okay, we're back. How much time we have, Carl? About 30 seconds before we get a sign off, Mr.
Really?
Celli. Yep. So that was a rapid half hour. I just want to say quickly that hopefully before this series is over, we're going to finally maybe get to the point that you mentioned, Jocko, where you talked about people feel that they have to have their comfort zone violated in order to finally get to work and confront our domestic enemies. So I guess we're close to the end, and I want to thank you for your bobblehead participation today. Much appreciated. And wrap it up.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
O great creator of being, grant us one more hour to perform our art and perfect our lives. Moths and atheists are doubly divinely dying. We live, we die, and death not ends it.